Merhaba, hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Ben Ümit Mesci. Öykü Özsoy Sağanak ve Nilay Dursun'la birlikte OLAFUR ELIASSON Senin Beklenmedik Karşılaşman başlıklı serginin küratörlerinden biriyim. Bugün de sergiye paralel olarak düzenlediğimiz kamusal etkinliklerden birindeyiz, sonuncusundayız. Bildiğiniz gibi sergi 9 Şubat'a kadar devam ediyor. Bu konuşmada OLAFUR'la ve pek çok başka sanatçıyla yaptığı işbirlikleriyle de tanınan ve çeşitli peyzaj projeleriyle de takip ettiğimiz Günther Vogt'u ağırlıyoruz. Konuşma bu arada 15 Ocak yani bugünden 2 gün sonra 17 Ocak'ta Çankaya Belediyesi desteği ve İsviçre Büyükelçiliğinin desteğiyle Ankara'da da gerçekleşecek. Bugünkü konuşmayı da İsviçre Başkonsolosluğu'nun desteğiyle düzenliyoruz. Konuşmaya geçmeden önce İsviçre Başkonsolosu Sayın Philip Brandt'ı davet etmek istiyorum sizi selamlaması için. Daha sonra Günther'le konuşmaya devam edeceğiz. Hoş geldiniz tekrar. Buyurun.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Ümit, dear Mr. Vogt, dear friends from Istanbul Modern, it's a real pleasure for me as the new Consul General of Switzerland in Istanbul to be here tonight for this, I'm sure, interesting discussion that we will have with Mr. Vogt in the framework of this OLAFUR ELIASSON project. Of course, we all know Mr. ELIASSON and what he did. And I really look forward to this exchange. And again, we've already had a few projects with you since I've arrived in September. We'll be here. We can continue this excellent cooperation in this fantastic place. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.
First of all, what is the difference or why I'm saying it's different? It's nothing that art is better than architecture or landscape architecture. It's really, artists like OLAFUR can really work global because you, as an audience, you understand this global aspect. In landscape architecture, it's very difficult. It's not that you have a different climate here in Turkey. By the way, you have many different climates than we have. But the real difference is how can I say, landscape is a cultural production. That means you all relate to your culture, and we have offices in Zurich, in Switzerland, in Berlin, in London, and in France. And for instance, when the colleagues of Paris and London are talking together, within 3 minutes there's a big fight, because they have a completely different understanding what landscape, Peyzaj, or in Italian paesaggio, or Landschaft in German. So for instance, for Switzerland, I created a new expression, valleyscape, because the scale is completely different to a traditional landscape in Europe. So therefore, the understanding, and you will see it in some projects, is very different. And I think of course, we are working in South Korea and the Middle East and so on. But what we are bringing, that these people really like their own landscapes. They are always criticizing in the beginning. It doesn't look like a Western landscape. Therefore, I mean, in Europe, we have a very simple approach. It's here in the UK again, we have the forest and the clearing. So here you only see the clearing, but before there was a forest around. And that's a very specific understanding, very European, that the forest is in the beginning, then you cut out trees, you have a clearing or clearings, and then that's the beginning. But in the Middle East, for instance, you have walled gardens, like this very famous one in Iran. It's a very different understanding, and it's not better or less good or whatever. It's really a different approach to landscape. And I show you now 3 examples, more about identity. Canetti wrote a wonderful book, Mass and Power, describing several different countries. I'll show you 3. And he explains through mass and power, the identity of Germany is the forest. And it's very special in the wonderful explanation why the forest is the national identity. The French identity is the revolution. I can tell you, we have student protests every 3 weeks in Paris. I don't know what for or against what. They really love political manifestation. It's really their identity. And now coming to Switzerland, it's the only parliament in Europe having a landscape in the room for the politicians. And now Canetti is describing the Swiss identity as the mountains. And now a bit provocative, I will show you why it will change this identity. It's difficult to say it in Switzerland, but I will explain you why. It can change. And therefore, we have in our office 2 different approaches. One is image-based design or knowledge-based design. And I will show you one here in Istanbul, which is extremely image-based design. But there is the first project I'm showing you is a collaboration with another artist, Dan Graham. He was very close to Olafur and myself, and he died 3 years ago. And he was asked by the Metropolitan Art Museum in New York to always do the rooftop commission every summer. And he told the museum, yeah, I do it with Günther. And he has to build a garden for me, but because my concept is I would like to show my work in a suburban, provincial, let's say, kitschy. And that's one of his very famous work, American Homes. So in New Jersey, he knows this suburban development, and he was so fascinated. He grew up there, and he was fascinated of the French Baroque, so the high culture, let's say, in garden culture, and the low culture, and therefore he wanted to have create somehow an environment which is really specific to his idea of low and high culture. So we built some models of a garden, and he was always fascinated, again, like Olafur. He phoned me one day and said, yeah, I'm so fascinated about your local horizon. And I asked my colleagues, what does he mean about the hedges and this horizon in urban situations? You know, the horizon in the landscape, but he was interested in our horizon in the park design. So we looked at references like Corbusier's very famous roof garden in Paris, so where it's getting very private, and it's outside, it's raining, but it's really outside and kind of private. That was for Dan super important to have this privacy in a museum. And so how it looked like, that was his idea. You see the roof garden in front, and the most famous park, the Central Park in New York, in the middle ground. In the background, the skyline of New York, and behind this skyline are these gardens of New Jersey. So that was for him really important. You can even say we did a copy, but it's not a copy. But we took the ingredients of these suburban gardens and proposed a kind of environment for his sculpture, which is a two-way mirror sculpture, and hedges, which is very prominent in New Jersey. So, and I'm not allowed to say publicly that this is not lawn, but you see it, so I don't say what it is. But in my contract, I'm not allowed to say what it is. So it's typical American, so it has to look like, it has to be, and of course it was super, in such a city, it was super effectful. It's like I was in the terrace here. This is a wonderful place. You go into a museum, you have a restaurant, you have an exhibition, and then you go on top. And I was so surprised coming up. I thought, okay, it was 3 or 4 levels up, and now I see the Bosporus again. It's very, I mean, this is really a point. I was really surprised. So you see it, it was during a whole summer, and it was super successful. Young people met there, had drinks up there, and sitting on this lawn. And it was a meeting point. It's like a pop-up meeting point in the summer. So now going into a completely different culture, to the UK. We did how can I say, it's not a park, it's not a plaza in front of the Tate Modern. And it took 2 years for me to understand. It was our first project in the UK to understand British culture. I mean, for us, the English landscape garden, this is really the top level of landscape design. But I didn't really understand their culture until they told me one day, really upset, you know, we are not Mediterranean, and especially we are not French. What do you mean? I mean, trees in line, trees in a grid, we are British. Okay, I got it. But not Mediterranean as well, so where you have in urban cultures this controlled vegetation, and not like in the British landscape, informal and more romantic. It's really their identity. So I got it, and then we did a project together with Herzog and de Meuron, a dance theater from Laban. It was a new new dancing scene coming from Russia in the 1920s, first to Switzerland and then to the UK. So it was a very poor, or is a very poor area in south of London, where you still see the Second World War, where the Germans attacked, and you still have many empty plots. But for this society or foundation, it was affordable in terms of prices. So they built this dance theater more or less only for women and girls. And I couldn't believe when I saw the neighborhood, how can they bring these girls in the evening here in this neighborhood? But that's another question. And this is a project. And you don't see any trees. By the way, I think it's the most ecological project we ever did in the office. And again, I mean, biodiversity, ecology, that's always a question or discussion I have with people like OLAFUR, is invisible. If you don't know it, you don't see it. You need this knowledge. And now you see it. Here it's only lawn. By the way, this is not fake or so. I did the photo myself. It looks like a rendering, but it's real. So that means it's only lawn, and we were not allowed to take the soil off the site because it's heavy contaminated. You can keep it on site, you can move it around. If you put grass on top, it's not dangerous, so people can sit on it, but it's contaminated. And then the next problem was you cannot plant a tree because of this little bird. The black red star. It's a very rare bird in London or in the UK, needing loose gravel or rocks, like the pigeons here in they love cities, because the pigeons all over the world are coming from Turkey, from these rocky areas, and this bird as well loves, because here was a second car cellar with loose gravel, demolished cars, and so this was his perfect habitat. Now his habitat is on the rooftop, where we added gravel, and you see, first of all, no trees, no benches, and just topography. And again, here I said, yeah, but you have so many people, and we did, as you can see in the background, and this you can only do in the UK, an amphitheater out of grass. That's only in this climate. It rains a bit more than here, believe me. But it's perfect for lawn. And then people sitting here and seeing this, sitting here in this amphitheater, and there is this dancer. But again, this I would only do, first of all, because of the climate, because of the lawn in the UK. And the next is you don't see any bench. That's typical what I learned in front of the Tate Modern. The British have an erotic relationship to touch grass. They really want to sit. It's a bit like here's a picnic. Also, they really, they took it over from your culture, this picnic culture, but they really want to touch grass. They don't want to sit on a bench. In front of the Tate, I said, yeah, but you know, you have European, other countries, visitors coming, yeah, okay, 5 benches. You have 7 million visitors, no? So they exchange this 2 times a year because it's, you can imagine, millions of people sitting there. So they do it. It's their decision, but it's, again, it's such a different culture than our culture. So, coming now to another type, I was several times here in Istanbul to explain the students, because Istanbul is very interesting for European cities between Europe and Asia, and you know the story. So we did a work in Haliç, and we needed something for European students or Swiss students not being familiar with the tradition here. I mean, they know all the brilliant buildings, mosques and so on. They all know it since they are architects. But they didn't have any knowledge or understanding of the landscape. So we went with them to the Belgrade forest and showed the river. And then I explained what is the identity of people in Istanbul. And they did interviews. And they didn't really find out what it is. Some related to the river, some related to the forest, some related to the country. So it was very difficult for my students to understand, but what is the identity then? And then we gave them a little help. Pyridesa is coming from very long before the religion, before all the religion we know in Europe and in the Middle East. It was long, hundreds of years before. It's what we say in English paradise or paradise in German. And it was starting or founded in the today's Iraq area. And it's a miniature describing paradise, and not in a religious sense. Later on, all the religion took it over. And then we found this could be, you know, as a designer, you need something to criticize yourself. So to look critical on a site. And so we did it for the students. So, for instance, in Switzerland, we added topography. It's quite important in Switzerland. But in the original, it's a boundary, entrance, metaphor, water, choreography, and planting or vegetation. So you can always relate if you work on such a site in this area, but even you can work in Europe with it. So you can check your design or your interest with this matrix. It's very easy then to work. And I only show you 2 examples, the boundary. So some student did a big fire in a forest near the university. And then what you see is the leftover of the fire. In the crown, there is a border, a boundary. Somehow it's a space. It wasn't visible as a space, but now it's visible as a space. And the next is another example, a rocket flying through the forest. It's a very temporary boundary by a friend of mine, a Swiss artist. I invited him to do something for the students that they really understand what is the approach from an artist. And then coming to this Haliç area, of course we did a really big explanation about the history and so on, and you know this for yourself. But then, and of course we showed them the Belgrade forest, which is really in transformation now, but it has very interesting infrastructure buildings, partly by SENİN, the famous engineer architect here in Istanbul. And so we showed them a bit the background. And what is the Belgrade forest for you, for Swiss people? Well, it's a forest. And I think for people in Istanbul, it's kind of park, but more on the weekend. And so just to explain, because the Swiss, they don't need an urban park, because Swiss transport system, where I live, it takes less than 2 hours to stay on a glacier, so I don't need a park. No, it's, I only have time on weekends. So this understanding, we have to bring it to students, and this very special tradition, the water supply, the kiosk coming from the Ottomans. What does it mean? I mean, water is so important. I still believe that we should have drinking water, no CCTV camera, seating. If it would be all over the world, on every public place, we would change the world. It's very easy. But it's not like that. And then we went to the Belgrade forest, and it's more and more privatized. That's a bit for me and for the students as well, because for Swiss students, it's impossible to think that such a forest is privatized, because the rivers, the lakes, the forests, a bit the forest less, but more or less everything is public. And for our students, it was very difficult to understand. So then they did this it was a military harbor, you know it, and we explained them, you have to go there and to do a survey. So what do you see in terms of semiotic, perception? Just go there. Don't think too much about culture and so on. What do you see? What do you think? What could it become? And in a very individual way. And they did it, these black and white photos, and really a survey, a field work, not working in the studio, but working in the field, and kind of typology. And normally you have a park or a plaza or promenade or so, but here it was very specific and different. And then we asked them to describe it, like the main street and the waterfront promenade. The passages is narrow. You know it in Istanbul for Swiss students. It was so narrow and dangerous, because it's narrow. And listen, it's not dangerous. It's just narrow. This is a perception you have when you go to New York. There it can be dangerous, or in London or in Paris, but not in Istanbul. It's and the pockets. And to tell them, you have to describe it. What is it? And it's perhaps in the end, you have a new typology and not the traditional typology you have in urban planning. And thresholds, for instance, coming from this paradisa, which is very important. And of course, it's time-consuming for the students, but in the end, what could it be? And so this overview, what could it be in future? Besides all the urban developments with building, just an approach without buildings, without building, what is the quality, what we find there? And more, I have to say, we have this approach that the really good architects or urban planners are asking us, can you do the work before, and then we come? So your judgment, what is good and what is not so good. Finally, I wanted to introduce the garden as well. So this is a huge hospital, completely crazy. In Europe, there are all hospitals now out of scale. And this, for instance, is close to Copenhagen, in the middle, like 60s in Europe, where you have all the big buildings and infrastructures on a meadow and so. And here you have more than 4,000 car parks. Can you imagine? I mean, it's not related to public transport, no, but of course you cannot find such a plot of land in the middle of Copenhagen, but at least you should have public transport. But nevertheless, it was or is under construction. And so it's a new type of hospital. In the past, it was always like this. So you were much longer in a hospital, like this elderly man on the left-hand side, or in Davos, where you had this patients having lung problems in the high altitude of Davos. So it's completely changing. So that they really need gardens. And it's the scale of the garden. So even if they don't go out, some patients can go out, but it's the scale of the garden, and then they can overview it, but they can go inside and to have a very intimate scale. And why I'm showing it, meanwhile it's overlapped with art, and in this case it's Swiss artist Pippi Lotti-Rist. She is doing projection of plants, digital, on analog plants. Sounds complicated, and it is a bit complicated. So that means the flower, we will see the flowers in wintertime. So, but it's still under development. It's not finished now. But we have like two approaches to this kind of gardens: a very artistic approach and the normal approach from us. And I mean, Denmark is a very famous country for modernist gardening, modernist park. We just did a publication about Sørensen, who did his famous gardens in Denmark. And finally, the rivers. That's one of these competition we did in Milan, where the client, Italian railway lines, asked teams of architects, big teams, really big teams, 15 offices, because you have contamination and so on. So one site should be completely free of buildings, just landscape or nature or whatever, and the other one can only be 40% urban development. Saying that in the past in Milan we did competitions about such a site, and then we got an urban strategy, urban development strategy. And then, of course, we did competition for the individual building, and the end, a competition about the landscape. But it's always a mess if you approach like that. So we should think from the landscape first, and then the urbanization is coming. And of course, with our background, so the Swiss landscape, for instance, it was, you see it here, completely covered with boulders, with stone transported by the glaciers. So, but meanwhile, you only see it in the forest and not in the farmland, because in the farmland you can't have all these boulders. But in the forest, you still have, you see them quite big. And so we use it, this research, by the way, for the Biennale, together with OLAFUR. He asked us to bring something in, and like these Rolling Stones, he brought in several architects, landscape architects and artists. And why I'm showing this is what you see now is the so-called glacier problem, and OLAFUR is relating to it and shows ice blocks in Paris and this climate summit and so on. But you see, in the end, it's everywhere. Now look right where Venice is. So you see, Venice is a very young city. And it's not only, you see when it ends, you hardly see any glaciers left. And end of this century, we will have no glaciers in Switzerland anymore. But Venice appeared because of a geological shift, and you have a tectonical plate here as well. And this plate was with the European plate, and then the landscape was 3 meters lower, and it was filled with this water from the glacier. And now I show you why Switzerland perhaps has to change identity in the future. What you see, before you saw it about the whole Alps, and now you see it's a really central part of Switzerland where the biggest glaciers in Europe are still there. And the light blue are the glaciers, and the dark blue are the lakes. So the glaciers disappear, and then we will get more than 2,000 lakes. And when you remember the painting in the National Assembly room with the mountains and the lake, perhaps the lakes are the new identity. Who knows? I mean, nowadays when you see a postcard from Switzerland, it's a mountain, it's white. But in the future, it will become no snow, it will be gray, and then the forest is growing 500 meters higher, and it will be green. So that's the future. The problem is that societies, not only Switzerland, are not discussing it now, but we are very late to discuss it. For instance, the good news for Switzerland is they have enough water in the end of this century. Not all countries in Northern Europe will have it. The only problem is not at the right time, because nowadays it's stored in ice and snow in winter time. So that means Switzerland, for instance, has enough water, but not at the right time. The consequence is they have to build dams. But then we should start to discuss with France, with the River Rhone, and with Germany, with the River Rhine. If Switzerland keeps the water back, what happens with the rest? So without managing it, Basel, the River Rhine, they're really super proud on their river, will have only 40% of the water they have today. It's a completely different river. And that's the near future, the next decades. But nobody is discussing it besides the artists. This is one of OLAFUR's students, and OLAFUR and myself, we organized with his students, art students, and my students, architectural students, as summers. It was a very famous summer school, different reasons. It was super successful. And this is one from the French-speaking part of Switzerland. This is a photo of the biggest glacier in Switzerland, and it looks nice, but finally it's horrible, because on the right-hand side you see these glaciers are covered with textile, and he made photos with heavy light at nighttime, and it looks really beautiful, but in the end it's horrible, and it doesn't help. So he knows it, I know it, but still they cover it with textile to keep the situation, but this dynamic will take over. So and so we did it in the Biennale with him, where we always work together. It was with him as well. And he did a photo in Greenland where he's burning an ice block, and you think, okay, so it's completely stupid. But if you calculate 7 or 8 billion people using so much energy, then it looks different. So it's a very typical, I would say, OLAFUR school. And he's quite often working in this glacier situation, not only in Switzerland, and then the model of the Alps here. And it was all the glaciers were dripping into this. So this, and that's what I learned from the artists, especially OLAFUR. You should more talk in the public, but if you have a traditional architectural exhibition, you see drawings and models, and then so-called normal people are coming in. They are not used to read drawings and models. You have to talk about different things. That's what I really learned our profession, I mean, in this case, architects and landscape architects, should show more in exhibition, but not still just project. I mean, that's not interesting for the public, but translate in interesting topics. So that's this Farini. I just showed this water thing in between, and we did an extended research. Milan is like Venice, but it's not visible. So they covered all rivers and everything. So it's not visible. That it's like Venice, a city with many channels. And for instance, this is a very early airport where the airplanes landed on water. It's still there. It's a kind of park. Meanwhile, but we found many historical things. So, for instance, there is a north of this line. It's 8 meters higher than south. South is the rice production along the river Po, and north is the industrial area of Milan. And this was then next day in all, when we won the competition with OMA, Rem Koolhaas, it was in all newspapers in Italy. So in the future we are talking about blue and the green Milan. And one of the sites is blue, so it's this one. And the other one, here, really huge scale, is this one. And you saw that this historical image, we found that this is a canal by Leonardo da Vinci, and this is our proposal. Completely out of scale compared to Leonardo da Vinci, but his canal was for here. It was for transport to bring goods into Milan from Genoa. Our canal is to clean the water, and it's a kind of new park. And we found this building, never finished building for the Italian railway station by Aldo Rossi, and we kept it and transformed it in a kind of cultural center. But I cannot explain everything. As I mentioned, at least 15 different offices, because it's becoming, meanwhile, so complex environment. So contamination and. So in the end, what are the future images? In the last Biennale, we were asked to do something like these glacier things, and then the director in the Biennale said, oh, you know, our garden is so empty, we don't have applications for the gardens. And in the end, OLAFUR asked, can you bring something like the Rolling Stones? And then what did we do in the garden? It was a model of a city. And you see, you don't see it nowadays. Venice is really a brick city and not a stone city. They really love stone, all kind of, but it's only cladding. Behind is always a brick. So we wanted to make it visible. So it looked in the beginning like a model of a city, and it's not burned, the bricks. So it's just clay. And of course, then a process starts, and it ended with a little hill of clay. And what we were interested in, besides this, it's kind of deformation. These plants are all invasive species, so we didn't plant it. So you see, we used to, like in a botanical garden, we gave during the exhibition in summertime, we showed this is this species in the scientific names, but they are all invasive, so not native. So, the last one is this exhibition with OLAFUR. And I'm quite often asked, what is the most interesting landscape and what is nowadays in Europe? And I said it's very easy. Where we are excluded, then it's really become beautiful. There is a famous forest in Poland. For 500 years, it was a Polish king, and in the end, the two Russian Tsars didn't allow people living around to cut any tree, to hunt, or to do. So nowadays, it's a kind of medieval landscape. It's the most beautiful landscape I know. But Chernobyl as well. Since we are excluded, all the wild animals are coming back, and the main alley in Chernobyl is now transformed into a forest because nobody can have maintenance, and all the wild animals are coming back. So this was a kind of starting point with OLAFUR. He wanted to open, by the way, the same architect as you have here for the Baylor Museum near Basel, by Renzo Piano. And we did like a next step from Bregenz, where we started in Bregenz. So it's like Dan Graham wrote a wonderful text, the museum as garden, the garden as museum. And that was for me very inspiring when OLAFUR said, okay, let's take the facade away. By the way, Renzo Piano agreed, very friendly. And of course, the facade is closed afterwards. What was really a shock, I mean, for people, for me as well, I mean, behind these white walls, there are Picassos and Monets and so. And I said, listen, isn't it a problem? No, it's not a problem. The real problem was 1 year later, then there was a real flood. And they really had all the Picassos and all take away to save it. And it was a real natural disaster. But because of this work, it was extremely present in the public discussion. And there was a little pond, or is a little pond by Renzo Piano, adjacent to the park. And so it was a real test for us, what kind of plants, because OLAFUR wanted to have the difference between daytime and nighttime with lighting. And at nighttime it was really special. You know it from this exhibition. It was complete, and you can see it in the photos afterwards. It was a completely different landscape. And I mean, you see it here. By the way, it was during COVID. And but it was really a successful exhibition because the visitors could stay a little bit in difference, and the restaurant gave my students, for instance, picnic blankets and picnics, so we could sit in a distance and to look inside. But you had to invest some time because you can go there at 3, 4 in the afternoon, but you should stay at least until 9:30 in the evening to see the night. And we did a lot of research because in the green is uranin. It's a little bit radioactive, but I mean many things herein are radioactive, a little bit, but not dangerous. But which plant to survive? It was a long test. You saw it in the first image when they take this water in the leaves, and then it's a completely different reaction on the light. But you see no handrails. I just explained in the afternoon. Peter Zumthor is working on a museum in Los Angeles, and he told me, this health and safety regulation, I have it here. And I told him, you have only to tell them, I mean, here there is no protection. You can only do it in Switzerland. Because the simple explanation was and Sam said, what do you think? What can I say if you have a little accident? And of course, 2 girls made a bit jokes, and they were in the water, but only shallow water. And then the guide in the museum said, hey, girls, and come out. And then it was done. In the US, you would really have a problem. I told Sam Keller, tell the journalists, Switzerland is a very dangerous landscape. It's a real landscape. It's really dangerous. You have to be careful yourself. You cannot expect that every institution is looking for you. And it was only this little accident. People were really careful. And then there was a little snake inside, some frogs and so on. And of course, we had to clean them, that they get rid of this green color. But the rest was very, very easy. And but again, such an institution doing such experiments, I think it's really wonderful. And especially the discussion in the exhibition in Bregenz, we did really public discussion with the visitors. And here, of course, because of COVID, we had to do it with newspapers and so on. But this exchange is, for OLAFUR, for instance, very important to, for instance, in Bregenz, we did a guided tour with a blind woman, and then we had such a audience with what did she really perceive as a blind, because OLAFUR is normally very visual, but she can't see it. But what did she perceive? What did OLAFUR perceive? And it was a really interesting discussion and this exchange. And I think that's, for me, interesting in such a museum. I had the best guide for this museum here. But I do a guided tour in a museum as a not art person. So, and I did it for the Bayer, as a museum in Liechtenstein. And they really like it. All the visitors, they have the same, a little bit less than me, but no, I'm a normal visitor. I'm not an art specialist, and so I explain what I see. And that's the new education program, and I saw it here as well, is really good. So, and you have to start with the kids. That's super important to bring people closer to the art world. And I think we should learn from the artists. We, as landscape architects or architects, we should talk more in the public with exhibitions about our work. So that people really understand what is our focus, what are our topics. We did several exhibitions now, for instance, in Los Angeles. The architects asked us to do a landscape inside. And then I said, that's always difficult. Where is the horizon in this landscape? Yeah, we would like to have as a background, as a stage for the student works, architectural students. And then we did, the floor was going up like this, concrete slabs from a construction site, so I mean rubbish. So everybody had to look like that, how to walk. And then we introduced oil. You have it present in Los Angeles, oil, and the smell is really the car smell. After an hour, we had to take it out because visitors were saying, it's dangerous, and say, but you have it every day in your city. No, you don't want it in a museum. Okay, perhaps you should change it outside, not in the museum. And then you start a very good discussion. And in this sense, I think the new art museum is not a garden, but it's a really mediator between different worlds outside. And so therefore I found his exhibition here, and of course I know all his exhibition. And you have to know, OLAFUR is telling in the public, his sister and me, we are the heaviest critique of him, but here I have to say it's really a very good exhibition, and sometimes it was very special, but here with these objects I was really impressed and surprised. So lucky you to have it here. Thank you.